Alrighty, so it's with the June 2021 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee. I guess let's begin. Let's begin with approval of the agenda. A motion?
So moved.
Okay. Any modifications necessary? All right. All in favor of the agenda as is?
You think do you need a second?
Oh.
I'll second it.
Mike, thank you. All right, so any modifications necessary? All right, so all in favor of the agenda as is, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, agenda adopted. Approval of the May minutes. I apologize that they were just sent out this morning, but I hope you've had a chance to take a look. They're not particularly long. So motion to accept the minutes or approve the minutes for May.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second it. Mike
thank
Shea.
you. All right. Any corrections or modifications to the minutes?
Has anybody read the minutes?
I have.
I did.
All right. So we did the motion in the second. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Say aye.
Aye.
More voices.
Aye.
Aye. By the way, Lois, they're very clear and thorough. I know you're joking about reading it, but thank you for being so clear.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes. Well, this is great with those. Okay, I don't even know how many ayes we just have. 4, maybe?
Unanimous.
All right, anyone opposed? Oh, okay, Myrna, gotcha. Any opposed? Any abstentions? And let me just chat to Myrna really quickly in the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna take that to be our minutes are all set. I'm waiting for Myrna. And let's move on to 3. So reports of the chair and vice chair. The first thing that we have under this list is Finance Committee. So that's you, David?
Yeah. Could you make me co-host so I can?
Sure. Check and see if you can share right now. I think you should be able to.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Screen 2. Can you see this? It says shared services. All right. Okay. So let me just start at the right place here. Oh, can you see me now? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, I got lost here. All
Okay.
right. So you can see here the state appropriation, which was approved in the assembly by the governor and was approved by both houses, increases the total amount going to the CSCU system for all purposes from 356.5 million in the previous biennial to 409 million for each of the years 2022 and 2023. So that's a 14% increase, which is significant, and that actually, among other things, also covers PACT for the next 2 years and adds money for guided pathways, and I'll mention that in just a bit. But if I go to the next slide, and can you see this now, state universities? This is from the report from the Ben Barnes, the CFO, so I'm just using some of his slides. This is quite interesting. And you can see here in blue our revenue, 736.4 million for the universities. But there are the two additional stairways. One is the HERF institutional. This is for the 2022 year. In other words, $43 million is coming in for the 4 CSU universities from the recovery plan, the third version, the higher education relief fund portion of that. And there's additional state support of 28.2 million, which I just mentioned earlier. So that puts the state universities, if you look at the very right-hand number in blue, the red, of course, are the expenses, personnel costs, financial aid and waivers, other expenses, and debt service. It puts the universities at a net positive of 22.1 million, which is interesting and significant. For the community colleges, you can see again the same sort of thing. The revenue, the HERF institutional money coming in for 2022 of 48.9 million, additional state support, part of that increase that I just mentioned earlier of 26.9, and that puts the community colleges also in a net positive result for 2022 at 6.4 million. I think of interest to us would be, for example, the guided pathways component. And I'll talk more about that when I do a brief report on the ASA committee, which I attended in the absence of Colleen, who was occupied with other important activities. And you can see what has happened here is that because of the extra money coming in from here and from the state, the board has decided, and I thought this was a dubious decision, to accelerate, as they say, the guided pathways. So it was supposed to be phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 would have been 3 community colleges. Phase 2 would have been 5, and phase 4 would have been 4 community colleges over the next several years. But because additional money has come in, they want to accelerate that and collapse all of those phases and begin the full hiring of, as you can see at the bottom here on the right-hand corner, 174 personnel. I'll come back to that later on, but you can see that the expected costs for the first 3 years, or the next 3 years of guided pathways, they actually go to FY24, is $55 million, which even in their projections is not covered by additional revenue through retention. So we'll come back to the guided pathways when I talk about the ASA committee. If we look now at the other thing that we've been focusing on, which is shared services, it's a little hard to see this, but it's a pretty clear presentation, and I'll make this available to all the members of the Faculty Advisory Committee as a email attachment. But the shared services will come to $54 million, of which $3 million is for the 4 universities. There's a very small component of shared services that goes there. So it's a total of $50 million for shared services for the community colleges, and that is funds that will be controlled from the system office. We have a breakdown of every one of the positions and the cost and fringe benefits for them, and I will also make that available to members of the committee if they want to take a look at it. It's an interesting part of the finance report. So if we look at shared services, we can see that the breakdown is the following for each of the coming 2 years. $26.4 million for HR, IT, accounting, payroll, and purchasing, $27.7 million for admissions, enrollment, management, financial aid, guided pathways, and registrar. So these are they sort of divided them, I guess. It took me a while to realize between those which are most directly dealing with students and those which are more remote. But that makes a subtotal of $53.1 million minus the $3 million CSU share, 50.1. And as I noted at our last meeting, that's an increase, not a decrease, from what it was costing when this was done severally at all of the individual colleges. It's about $1.5 million more. Add to that the CCC, the so far non-existent one community college, the system office cost will be 9.3 million. And that's for academic affairs, the executive, and the regional presidents and their offices. So that makes a total cost for to be controlled by the one community college of $59.4 million. And if we add to that the cost of the CSCU system office component, that would make that the amount of money controlled centrally within the CSU system at $70.4 million. That's more than the budget of any community college. It's in effect a 13th community college. So I thought those were the salient matters. I asked at the Finance Committee meeting about guided pathways and why they were proceeding to accelerate this when they did not have the data from phase one, which in a sense was supposed to be a pilot, because the offsetting revenues are supposed to occur by projection due to students, a 10% increase in retention, and students taking in addition an additional 3 credits per year, I believe, due to better advising. But of course, that has not been demonstrated. And the response which I got from the CCC officials who were present is, well, it's worked in other states. So we'll come back to that when I talk about the ASA committee. Are there questions for the financial component of the report? It's interesting reading, and it's worth looking through. And of course, there were 94 pages of it. These I thought were the highlights. I tried to make a joke at the Finance Committee meeting. I said it's like reading Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. It's not exactly, it's an acquired taste, but nobody got it.
That's not surprising, David.
David, it sounds like they can't handle the truth.
Well, it is interesting to see. I mean, we've talked about the over centralization, and you can see it in terms of the finances.
Fran has a hand up. Go ahead.
Finally figured out how to put a hand up.
Mhm.
David, in the previous budget, there were 4 budget lines, as I recall. There was the proposed community college, there was the community college system office, there was the CSU office, and there were shared services. So I don't know if the 70.4 million includes all 4 of those components.
Yeah, that would include all 4.
Okay, just want to be sure. So if I remember, the figure for this fiscal year was about 69 million for all of those.
Yeah, it's slightly increased.
Yeah.
There may be some rounding errors there.
And if I remember correctly, David, one thing that was mentioned was that raises were not figured into this budget. So we're good as long as there are no raises.
Yes, I should have added. They are assuming no raises at the community colleges, at the universities, or at Charter Oak for the next at least 2 years. And they have not included even the likely increases in the cost of fringe benefits, which goes up no matter what. And that will go up with inflation, obviously.
All right. So, Lois.
I have been hearing that there are going to be raises at the administrative level, at the system office level. Has anybody else heard that?
I think that there will be, because they're reclassifying some people who are being promoted from, say, a community college to working at the CCC system office. There may be some raises that would result from reclassification of individuals. I know that's one component of the increase in the cost of shared services.
My understanding was that there were just going to be some general raises of people who were already administrators.
Yeah, I don't have information on that.
Okay.
All right. Should we move on then to ASA? And I guess I will report briefly on last month's ASA, and then David, you can do this month's. And really, as far as last month's ASA, for me, I think the most consequential thing would have been that ACME is finally and totally approved by the board. And I included sort of a timestamped link to the video and the agenda because I found the I thought the meeting was very interesting. There was not, our student regents are pretty amazing in with the thoroughness with which they read these policies, right? Why have I just blanked on her name? David, help me out. The chair of the student advisory committee is she really, Audrey Nielsen, I believe she's going by, really read the policy and was asking fairly targeted questions, and she was asking for data and so on. And the questioning was cut short. She did not get the answers to her questions that she was looking for. She made it very clear that she did not feel comfortable voting on the policy in the absence of studies and data and evidence that was promised but had not been produced. So, and then both student regents, just as in the oh, that's right. So I'm sorry, I'm talking about the Board of Regents meeting at this point. So let me back up for a second. The Academic and Student Affairs meeting earlier in the month was the one at which Antonia, the student regent on Academic and Student Affairs, asked for a roll call vote and voted against ACME. At the Board of Regents meeting on May 20th, that was the meeting at which Audrey was asking questions and didn't get her questions answered. And at that meeting, both student regents voted against it after asking for a roll call vote. And it, other than the two student regents, it was unanimously approved. So it has moved forward. I've also included on the agenda a link to the statement that I read into the minutes that really sort of ends with the conclusion that, you know, faculty are not in fact in control of the curriculum. And it is signed by myself, by a CMAC chair. If anyone can remind me what CMAC stands for, I'll fix that. And the two CSET chairs. So yeah, so that's the end of that. Apologies for delivering it in such a slow and convoluted way. And so that's ASA and the board meeting, just in terms of the ACME situation. And then David, I guess I'll give it to you for this ASA and the board meeting more generally.
Let me just add, I was impressed watching at the board meeting that the student regent stood her ground, because at one point after asking for a roll call vote was pointed out, well, we really don't need it, and she said, yes, we do. And I thought that was significant. And you have then the students voting against ACME and the faculty representatives to the board also in opposition. So I think that's significant, at least from the moral point of view,
Yeah.
if not necessarily the legal. Okay, for the ASA meeting today, I attended it. It's the first one I've actually sat through. I was just watching the online YouTube presentation, obviously. And the highlights, I'll just give you the highlights. One was that they approved alignment proposals for 32 different programs. None of them were discussed at all, although reference was made to the CJ task force, which we know has been the most successful in terms of coordinating programs, and they have come up with one program, but with multiple options. For example, in effect, separate programs for those interested in going into policing, prison guards, probation, etc. And so the advantage, as explained by the folks at the ASA, were a single catalog. Students can begin any program, at least in first year at any campus. Then faculty can either travel, that's what they said, or part-time faculty can be hired, or the students can go online to take a program, for example, computed tomography, CAT scans, which obviously is offered only at one campus. So there you have the 32 programs for which alignment en bloc was approved. It was one motion to approve them all. Nobody discussed the content of any of them. For alignment, there was further discussion because one of the members of the committee, and the committee members did pose some questions, asked whether all the campuses were in agreement. And it was explained that at least 2 had refused to vote, 4 were opposed, but really that doesn't matter as they had representatives supposedly on the APRC. It was the associate vice president for student success who was speaking, and he pointed out that when the Senate of one community college was opposed, they simply went to the curriculum committee for a better reception. And in the absence even of that, they were satisfied when at least one faculty member was involved in each alignment. There was also online posting for comments, and that was a quote for those who were afraid to speak up in group meetings. So that was the one aspect of the meeting. The second question was, I've already mentioned earlier, was guided pathways. And as I mentioned, they are collapsing or accelerating phases 2 and 3 because of money coming in through the state appropriations and the federal grants to complete stages 2 and 3 of the hiring, and which you saw just earlier involves hiring 172 people. This was to the question, how do we know this is going to be successful? The answer was basically, well, there's been successful experiences in other states. The pathways, and I think most of you must be aware of this, there will be 3 different levels within each campus. At level 1, you would have GPA 1 guided pathways, level 1. A bachelor degree would be required, but not a master's. And this was explained so that it could include people, for example, high school guidance counselors might want to apply for these jobs, and other people who would not have master's degrees but could be valued for the diversity which they bring to the assignment. As you know, it's 250 students per level 1 advisor. Then there are level 2 advisors. Those people would need a master's degree with some experience, and they supervise the level 1 people. Then you have a third level, which is the campus advising lead. That wasn't further defined, but that's an individual who supervises the supervisors of the advisors. And then you had level 4, which is the regional managers. So there would be regional advising managers in each of the 3 regions. And then, of course, level 5, the associate vice president for student success at the level of the CSCC. There were questions from the committee members, which I thought were good questions, although they were quite satisfied with the answers they received. So there's one question, would the level 2 supervisors have any students to advise? And it was stated that they could have up to a half load of 125 students. And to the question, would the campus lead be advising? The response was, well, at peak times or to replace absences, the metaphor was all hands on deck situations. The leads could also be brought in to meet with students. Advisors are supposed to have areas of specialty, of academic specialty, and they have to coordinate with faculty who advise on that program. The main way in which this will be done, however, is through the Ellucian software. Ellucian is the same company, of course, which produces Blackboard, and that software is going to be available by 2022 for advisors, faculty, and others. Could be counselors, could be mental health or physical health people, including automated notice of non-registered students. And I've actually seen a demonstration of the Ellucian software a number of years ago. And depending on how many alerts are recorded, the student would be highlighted in green, yellow, or red, right? And supposedly the advisors will intervene in those situations, especially when it gets to a crisis level. It was pointed out that there was a need to overcome the resistance to new advisors by faculty, and that various high, mid, and also low-level indicators would be monitored. The third report was on the Criminal Justice Task Force. And you recall that that had been established some months ago at the system office. There's going to be a report to the Board of Regents for the September meeting. This is a brief summary of the aspects which seemed pertinent to her by Jane Gates. And she indicated that the report did not find evidence of explicit anti-racist content in CJ programs at the university and community college levels, although it did find some evidence of diversity content. The report will highlight the need for what they call intentionally anti-racist curriculum, courses, and program content. Another problem that was raised was a problem of internships where students were not being paid or were not paid enough, and that made it difficult for them to do it, or that the internships were offered at times that were inconvenient or impossible for them. So that CJ task force will be reported to the board at its September meeting. There was also an online programs update. And this was Kevin Corcoran, who is the responsible for the online office at the system office. And he had begun by discussing the need to move from hybrid to fully online, need to look to the national landscape to see how others do it. And this is a common theme. When you look at ACME, or you look at guided pathways, or you look now at online programs, the reaction of the system office is to look elsewhere. They're not particularly interested in finding out, on my view, what faculty who are actually teaching those courses have to say. I guess they've had too many criticisms and they are just looking elsewhere. But in any case, the irony of the whole thing was that Kevin Corcoran's audio failed on his computer as he was giving a report on the need to move to online programming. And despite efforts to get him back, it wasn't possible. And so that report has been postponed to the September meeting. However, there was a conclusion, which was mentioned by, I think, Ken Klusiak, and that was that the interim president has agreed to a task force on online learning, and that there will be a system-wide online learning council established as of the fall, to be co-chaired by someone from the system office and a person from the community colleges and from the universities. There was no discussion of the failure of online CSU or the closing of the CTDLC. And as I said, that whole report was interrupted by the failure of the audio on the part of the report maker. So those were the four things which I thought were of interest to us: program alignment, guided pathways, the CJ task force, and also the online programs.
Thanks, David. That's a hand, right, Lois?
Yes, David, if you could go back to the APRC thing for a minute.
Yes.
What they stated about accepting these, or how they went through governance or whatever, they made some comment about for opposed. I would assume one of those is Norwalk. But that didn't matter because we had representation on APRC. Norwalk has no representation on APRC. They lied.
Yeah, that was my recollection. I don't know that they went through each community college, but the representation, let me put it this way, to be as sympathetic as I can to the other side, that there was faculty representation of some sort. And basically what they meant by that was it could have been at the APRC, or it could have been when they went to a curriculum committee, or it could have been that an individual faculty member had participated at an alignment committee meeting, or that an individual faculty member had posted online. So let me sort of spread it out amongst those four aspects.
Our curriculum committee voted all this down as well.
I could just say for Naugatuck Valley, I'll say the same as Lois, that we did have a faculty member who served on APRC, but she did not represent the faculty governance bodies at Naugatuck Valley, because we voted a resolution stating that we were the only faculty senate was the only body allowed to elect someone to a system-wide committee. She did not represent us. She represented herself. And she was so disturbed by what she saw on APRC that she attended the march and rally at the Capitol to protest what was going on in terms of this consolidation. So for us to say that we had representation, that again is a lie, just like Lois said for Naugatuck Valley. Our curriculum committee also voted to oppose this alignment work. So again, at least for Naugatuck Valley and for Norwalk, I believe that what they are saying is a complete lie.
And I think at many of these colleges, or many of the colleges, like at Gateway, this is the case. We didn't elect anyone, but someone volunteered. And that person is then sort of a little alarmed in the sense that she's trying to bring information to us and is not entirely sure how to act or do anything meaningful within that group, right? So they're passing information back and forth, but not quite sure. I will say I'll just jump to, as on the same kind of information, to the CCIC meeting, where all of the stuff that you mentioned, David, that was just not reviewed but approved, all of those all of the curriculum, it came through CCIC also. And there was, again, once we figured out how to do polls in teams, I think the meeting lasted maybe 15 minutes. It was on the consent agenda, and that was it, all of the programs. Justification for that was that there were many levels of review, including work groups, the online feedback, the APRC, the going to colleges, that, there's so many levels of review already that to do it again at CCIC would be superfluous. So it would, and it doesn't actually get voted on at academic council either. It's sent to academic council as an information item, and then forwarded to the board. So basically, all of the entities that are really voting on it go ultimately through the consolidated college structure and straight to the board. So yeah, it was very quick. There was no review at that level either.
It seems to me that it's not coincidental that they're essentially skipping CCIC after CCIC held up ACME. That seems to be not coincidental to me at all.
I mean, yes, but also just as a matter of practicality, I have no idea how we could possibly have reviewed that, right? And that's, I guess, going to be the way that it is. Like the board can't possibly review the volume of programs, courses, and so on that will be coming through in the next few months. So we're just going to have to kind of trust, I guess that's what we're doing. And as far as bypassing academic council, the claim was that that's exactly what happened with TAP. So they're just mimicking the process with TAP. Also, I asked to be clear because last we knew, the names of the people who worked on these programs and courses, who developed them, who were ultimately responsible for them, were not being made public. So I just asked for that to be confirmed again, that is in fact the case. And that is the case, but I was assured by Mike Stefanowitz that they are making sure that a member of full-time faculty who is qualified in the discipline is participating on each of these work groups. He did assure me of that. But of course, it's not being made public and so on. Go ahead, Lois. Lois? Oh, I think she got a call right as she was about to speak. Okay. But yeah, so we were assured of that, but the names again are not being shared, and there are still a few cases where it is not clear who is ultimately responsible for the program that came forward for various reasons. David, do you want to? I don't know if you want to stop sharing or if you're looking
Yeah.
for something that you're going to share with us.
I'm done.
Okay, so
If
you want
there's
to
any
stop
other
sharing?
questions, let me stop the sharing.
Okay, cool. So as long as we are talking, oh, go ahead, Lois, and
I'm sorry, I did get a phone call, you're right. Your statement about Mike Stefano, it's saying that there would be somebody who actually knew about these programs sitting on these whatever committee, whatever they are. Why should we believe that?
I don't know, and I also don't understand how it could be acceptable that in a public university, college and university system, that names of people who are being compensated for work are not disclosed. And I think you've made this point several times, right, Fran, and attempted to get this information. It is odd, and it does seem, the claim that's being made is that these people are so fearful of retribution, or that the climate is so, there's so much disagreement, right, between us all, that it is necessary to keep this information, private. But that seems to be a really big claim. I mean, I think things have to be really bad for you to say that you're not going to let me know. You're going to ask me to vote to endorse a program, but you're not willing to let me know who worked on it. I mean, that is part of my endorsement, because I may not be, a specialist in that area. I need to know that somebody qualified has worked on it. That's part of the endorsement process. So to me, it interrupts the normal, the appropriate mode of governance. So to say something that, that serious, that we're in a state, and I don't think this is a way to run anything. But okay, and I do also think maybe it should be backed up. Lois, you want to follow up, and then Ron, and then Fran?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think this is illegal. They are a state institution, and they have to be transparent, and I really think we should probably be going to our unions and having the union lawyers FOIA this. Because I know on a couple of occasions when I've FOIA'd things, going through a lawyer makes a big difference. So we might want to talk to the unions about this.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, I would just say another area. I mean, I know that Kalani, you and the CMAC and CSET chairs all signed a letter saying that the English and math curriculum was no longer under the control of the English and math faculty. I think looking at the feedback on the aligned programs also does a good job of demonstrating that none of those programs are under the control of faculty, because the most common response to faculty criticism was not actionable by faculty. That was the number one response to criticism of any of the programs, or critique of the programs, or of details of the program, not just the entire program or the governance system, but details in the programs. The number one response from the system office was not actionable by faculty, and I really have an issue with anything that's curriculum based being not actionable by faculty. I think that is explicitly stating that faculty do not have control over this curriculum.
Fran.
Yeah, Lois already made most of the point I was going to make. This is a legal matter. We're building a curriculum for one college that's going to impact tens of thousands of students. And the public has a right to know who is doing this work, when they met, how they made decisions. I've actually issued 3 FOIAs. The first 2 came back to me. So we've learned 2 things. There were no chairs on these work groups. and there were no minutes taken. So we know that much. Now we're waiting for names. But I agree, if we can't get them as individuals, we have to look at other options. You know, one might be the press might be interested in this story too. I think it's an interesting story.
And as long as we're on this topic of curriculum and consolidated college and so on, I mean, we just ended a what, 7-month saga of ACME. I think that the statement, you know, that we were able to get sort of signed by, whether it's one CMAC chair at least and both CSET chairs, it says something, right? It really does. Is there anything else that we should know about sort of where that's going, and any discussion on just ACME work?
I think the fact that CMAC and CSET have both now agreed to work on supports for ACME undercuts that message that you originally sent. Totally undercuts it.
I feel
And,
that way.
and the English and math faculty have caved in, and it's you know, they are now decided to support their loss of agency.
I mean, I have to say, as someone who used up a lot of board meeting time to convey what I believed were my colleagues' positions, I do feel like I wasted a lot of people's time, because if the position was what I said it was, I don't think it should be possible to move forward to work on this. And I also worry that if it is, and folks just feel pressure or just a lack of options, right? If it is, and that's how folks are feeling, I worry that we're exposing ourselves in a way that you see right now. Like Jen has been so clear about the situation with PA 1240, about the good work that was done, and the fact that the part of it that's not within the hands of faculty is the sort of the funding to actually execute the plan fully, right? And now a lot of the narrative is that faculty have been failing students in developmental courses for years on end, where there should be some responsibility taken, I think, by leadership if the resources have not been there to make it possible for them to do that. I worry that if this policy is so constrains faculty, if it really does, right? If it really does, right? Then if it so constrains faculty, they're necessarily building something that they've already said will be, you know, inadequate, possibly harmful, etc. And guess who's responsible at the end of the day, right? It will again be the story that you have been failing our students, and it will be the fact, right? It will be true. And I worry about that a lot. So I don't know if I took the words of warning too seriously, and that's not the situation that we're in. But if that is the situation that we're in, I'm still pretty concerned.
I could add that, you know, there's no indication in the financial report for funding for the extra assistance for students being placed at college level math and English courses. Right? Even though for the guided pathways, it's quite clear. They've explicitly stated the number of people, the amount of money, and so forth. I don't see anything for the ACME proposal. To me, it strikes me as unfunded. And more generally, I think that, you know, when I brought this matter up at the Finance Committee with respect to the guided pathways, the response is that, well, we're doing all these 10 different things. I mean, I exaggerate by saying 10. We're aligning the courses. We're doing guided pathways. We're doing ACME. We're doing et cetera, et cetera. And all of this, you know, one big heap of things to be done, which seems, just from a practical point of view, unrealistic. Never mind the issues of faculty control over curriculum. Never mind the fact that this is costing more money and not saving money, etc. It's just not, it doesn't seem feasible that any system can be modified in the space of a couple of years in the way in which they are trying to do it. It strikes me as utopian at the best, right? And in fact, when it comes down to brass tacks, it's ideological. It's students first, it's faculty are at fault, and it's bureaucratic because it is creating an immense bureaucracy, a second system office even larger than the first one. And that is the practical impact of it.
Well, and David, if they looked at home in terms of our experience with this and what they're trying to do, they would learn some things. For instance, I mean, I think you made this point, David, when you were saying they kept looking outside the state because they don't want to hear what we have to say. But we tried free supports for students in developmental education. We had free support for math and I shouldn't say free. I should say optional. And that's what they're doing. They're making this optional. We've had optional supports for English and math. And what we found is that these students did not show up for any of it. So maybe that's why it doesn't cost anything, because you don't need to hire anyone for a support that students will not show up for. And so that's the problem that we had. The other issue where if they looked at home, they would see a solution is that we at Naugatuck Valley, our students currently have a 30-to-1 student to advisor ratio. And so now Guided Pathways is going to improve that by making the ratio 250-to-1. It just defies math and defies logic. It doesn't make any sense. But because they don't care about what is happening and what we've done well at Naugatuck Valley, because the narrative is that we've done everything poorly, right? They don't care what we have to say. And so they are looking outside the state to states, quite frankly, that have a much, much weaker history of support for higher education. You know, the states they have mentioned are not states that you would think of when you think about, you know, what states have historically done very well in terms of their higher education system.
I noticed, David, that when you pointed out that we were hiring, what is it, 172 people?
172.
Right, and we're funding that with the HERF money, and we don't know what happens in 2 years, right? Like how do we pay them? The response was, it's not just Guided Pathways advising, right? So, Barnes responded to you saying, well, he's not really the person to tell you how effective Guided Pathways would be, but he has been assured. And, the follow-up was that, well, it's part of a suite of interventions, right? And one of those interventions was ACME. But again, like you point out, if it hasn't been funded, if nothing has been put in place to ensure its success, again, there's good reason for it. I just basically see that what we've been doing for CSCC is looking like a college by just hiring a lot of people. But other than that, I'm not seeing the commitment to students. Yeah. All right, so I think, should we move on from ACME, curriculum, etc.? So I will move to now these SLAs, right? CEOs have these service level agreements with EMSA, Enrollment Management Student
Affairs.
Okay, yes. And that is basically like all of the student services stuff that has been shifted over to the system office and is now, I believe, is it Allison Buckley running that area, right? So that now, in a certain sense, much of the functions for which CEOs are ultimately responsible are actually conducted out of the system office. They are contracting them out. It's sort of like an insourcing, outsourcing is the way I heard it put, right? So they're not under the direct control of the CEOs. The folks doing these jobs don't answer to the CEOs, they answer elsewhere. And it's just a matter of making sure that this, basically what amounts to a sort of outside contractor for the college actually fulfills this. And I think it's a little nerve-wracking, right? And I'm because again, we're doing so many things simultaneously that if there are any moments, if there's any moment at which there's a risk that that balls get dropped, right? Even if this were the best plan on earth, the transition of building a new college, moving all of these reporting lines, restructuring how everything is going, implementing guided pathways, all of these things simultaneously, something's bound to kind of fall apart, and it ultimately leaves the CEOs a little bit. I think this is the reason I'm sharing it with you, because I've gotten a lot of questions about it, because people have heard about it and we're concerned that CEOs are kind of left on the hook for stuff that is now being taken out of their control, right? That's kind of like basically the way it is. So that's going to be something to just kind of keep an eye on, to make sure that the level of service is what it ought to be, right? I don't know if anybody know. I mean, that's all I know. Got the documents, took a glance. They're fairly extensive. I didn't look that closely. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts or information on that, but I just thought that we should be aware, because this was one of those things that was sort of popping up in conversation here and there, described in various ways. Go ahead, Lois.
The level of service is not working. I had been working a couple of weeks ago. I had a conversation with a student who was having issues, a particular issue, and she had gone to admissions, or she had gone to an advisor, and the advisor said, "Oh, I can't help you," and sent her to admissions. And so she called the admissions number on our website, which looks like an NCC number, 857 whatever 7068. She called that number, and it turned out she didn't realize it, but it didn't go to NCC. It went to the call center, and that she was put on hold, and the recording said they would call her back, and they called her back like 2 days later, and then they said, "Oh, they can't help her, too bad." So I ended up having to help her. Bottom line was, I ended up helping her and resolving her issue, but she couldn't get it resolved for weeks in this new system. And nobody seemed to know that phone number had been redirected to this call center. Nobody was told that actually had happened, and it's also that way for financial aid as well. So they're real problems.
Yeah, I'd say at Gateway, when students at the end of April trying to figure out what to do at the end of the semester, about different courses and so on, and they couldn't get appointments with advisors until, I think they were scheduling for the end of May, beginning of June at that point, which was just really difficult. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, calling that number was really weird. I called it at Gateway, and it said, "Thank you for calling CSCC. Please stay on the line for a customer service representative."
Right. And it may be recorded for something or other, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Which is, again, when you talk about like recruitment for your college, it's very hard to recruit specifically for Gateway when it is impossible to simply call Gateway. And I don't know where Gateway exists other than as a branch of this thing now. So yeah. All right. So now we all know what that is. It's not the boogeyman. We can look right at the documents. Update on the joint meeting. So you know that the plan was supposed to be that we delivered the questions to folks at System Office last month, and the hope was that they could give us written answers by June 4th so that we could review them and start talking about them and developing responses at this meeting. We've been asked to wait another month because the transition to new president, the end of fiscal year reports and budget for the following year, all of that stuff was happening. Some of our questions should have been answered in the process of creating those reports, and others will have to be tracked down. So yeah, so we've been asked to wait until July for those answers. And also it might give us an opportunity to get those answers with the benefit of the new CSCU president having weighed in, or at least, being on the same page, So that's it. We should be getting those answers next month. That will be exciting. And then we can go from there. And I will say that Terrence Chang was sort of CC'd on the request that we wait a month, and he made sure to reach out immediately and just give a call just to assure us that this is, this is not a matter of sort of pushing something off, in bad faith. This is really just a matter of a need for a little bit more time because they're in a bit of a scramble. So that's where we are with that. Okay. Legislature. I don't even know what to say there. Does anybody have anything that you want to say? I mean, I have some stuff to share, I guess, but I'll get that together. So I actually think that Sean Bradbury sent out a summary that was actually quite good in terms of it was concise and fairly comprehensive. It was focused on the things that I think most of us were interested in this year. Unfortunately, it did not really reflect a lot of the things that many of us were hoping for, right? We hoped for just a study even of the system, right? That was the thing that we voted on, a simple study of the system. And the atmosphere in let's just say in the administration generally, right, is such that even that is something that creates a lot of resistance, because it suggests that there is some doubt about the direction in which the Board of Regents is going. So not even a study could be approved. I find that very, very disappointing. Very disappointing. I understand that the mergers and closings bill, so HB 6403 was the mergers and closings bill. We knew that would be contentious. We knew that would be difficult. And it was, though it was amended so that it would actually, prevent any college from accreditation without approval from the legislature. And it was also changed so that any merger on which the legislature has not approved explicitly is deemed not approved. So had it gone through, it would have applied to the consolidation, the current consolidation. Obviously, there would be a lot of resistance there, but the study seemed like it should be, and it actually in everyone's favor to get a sense of what's going on, so that maybe we could come to some understanding of how to move forward together. But even that was not a thing. So one thing I wanted to mention, our 6402 turned into 6400 and something else replaced 6402. So if you're looking for where our bill went, it changed numbers. It's now 6400. And 6402 became this kind of everything bill where everything got thrown in. I'm trying to pull this up, so just let me know if you have anything to say while I look for the list of things. The one great thing about this session is that I think our system is in a better financial position than it has been in anyone's memory. So in the short term, we got money. We even have more money than we need in various different, pots, right? We are good. And the state has money. So we are good in the short term. But I think, if our unions were part of the Recovery for All coalition, and the hope had been that we would use this moment to set ourselves up in the long term by finding sources of revenue. Those sources of revenue clearly were in the form of taxes on the ultra rich. That didn't happen. So while we are good right now, when you combine the fact that there's a lot of hiring going on without a plan for sustaining it beyond the HERF funds, and the fact that we haven't established, ongoing sources of revenue for all of this, 2 years from now, we might be dropping off a cliff again, right? So we have to think through that. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that we have more resources. Unfortunately, it's all being misspent. So that's a problem, right? I mean, we have all this money, but it's not reaching the students. It's being spent on centralization and administration, and on advisors who are also disconnected from the students and disconnected from the classrooms. So
Right.
So that's a huge problem. I also wanted to mention about the legislature. It seems to me that and I wasn't aware of this until I started working on, lobbying legislators and working on this stuff. But it seems to me that we don't really live in a democratic system. It seems to me that the legislative leadership, the speaker, the Senate Pro Tem, basically control everything that reaches the floor. And they and the governor and a little small group of advisors decide what the laws are for Connecticut. And nobody else really has a say. I find that incredibly sad. And particularly as a taxpayer and a voter, I find it incredibly sad. But it really opened my eyes as to how our supposedly democratic system works.
I mean, yeah, it was a little shocking, right? There's this huge disconnect. There were people lying down in the streets, right? Over, for the past few months, appealing for just basic necessities. And we know because of the way the tax structure is, it is those very people who are most burdened with the costs of the state, right? So if we want to provide them with, if we want to at least provide them with adequate services. But yeah, the apparent commitment of the governor was to not raise taxes. He's very happy that did not happen. And, and that's just that. That's just that. And, if you look at the sort of the number of people who have need, it really doesn't seem like, right? It's a representation of the larger number at all. Let me mention a couple other bills. Unemployment benefits for part-timers was something that folks were working on for quite some time. It got pretty far down the road and then died. There are two different perceptions. One is that it's going to be sort of cripplingly expensive for the system to bear, and the other is that that's quite an exaggeration. It's not that bad. I don't actually know which one is true, but that's basically where the whole thing came to a stalemate and didn't move forward. So that is the kind of thing that I think everyone knew that it would take some time, even if it were to be accomplished. So I think there will be more work on that in the next session. Senate Bill 997 was a bill that proposed that, like, David and I would have voting rights on the Board of Regents, and there would be more voting student representatives, both for our system and for the University of Connecticut. Passed, I think that one was unanimous, or overwhelmingly passed through the Senate, but never made it to the House. And the same with Senate Bill 850, which involved transparency of the budget. And what was the other thing? And training for members of the Board of Regents. That also, and that was something that even the system did not oppose, right? This was something that they publicly at least completely accepted, thought it was fine. But it again passed through the Senate, didn't quite make it to the House. But the transparency portions might still make it in through, like, budget implementation next week. So that is the plan anyway. So the transparency stuff should happen, but all the other has been lost. I have a lot of things I could say about what happened this session, but I don't know that I want to say any of them. But yeah, so I think those are the real takeaways. We are in a really good financial position for now, in the very, very short term, and almost all of the sort of governance related bills died. We had some decent bills when it came to things like, for students, sort of mental health support and reporting of sexual misconduct and things like that, that I think our students are going to be really happy about, because they did support it and we're tracking it also. Okay, that's all I have to say. Any other thoughts on legislature? Because I think we're going to have to think about that moving forward, how we're going to continue to relate with the legislature. I think there should be another consolidation forum this year. There should be, I think. All right, let that go. So I think that's it for chair and vice chair reports. Did we forget anything, David? Are you? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's all I had.
Okay, great. So do you want to take the next thing, the mandatory vaccine work group?
Right. Well, as I reported at the last meeting, at the April meeting of the board, I brought up, because it wasn't on the agenda, the question of mandatory vaccination for students, faculty, and staff for the fall 2021 term. A lot of universities were already making that decision. Both public and private universities, remember, University of California, California State, public universities in New Jersey, Yale, etc. Subsequently, there was a brief discussion at the board, and interim president Jane Gates said that she would get in touch with me, and she did within the week, and asked me to set up a working group to come up with a resolution and respond to 6 questions that she had. And so I did constitute that group with the idea that there would be representation from community college faculty, university faculty, staff, and students. And so it included, besides myself, Fran and Paul Creech from the FAC, Bill Faraklis from Southern, from Public Health Department, Audrey Nielsen, who is the vice chair of the Student Advisory Committee, and Mike Russo, who is director of counseling and student development at CCSU. And we met 4 times and developed a resolution in response to the 6 questions that I'll mention afterwards. But the main thing is the resolution, which I then submitted to Jane Gates in fulfillment of the mandate of the working group. She asked to have a meeting with us, and I think 3 of us were able to attend, myself, Mike Russo, and Bill Faraklis. We met with Jane Gates, Alice Pritchard, and Ernestine Weaver, the CSU counsel, on Tuesday to look over this. And we did make some modifications at that meeting. Basically, that it was excessive to expect visitors to be vaccinated before they come on campus, but that we could have a mask mandate and also restrict them to some buildings for a particular activity, and inform the public in advance through publicity and signage that mask wearing would be required for members of the public coming to an activity on the campus. And there was, secondly, that we wanted to make more precise that what we were asking for was approval of the principle of mandating universal vaccination for faculty, students, and staff. And there was a component there as well for third-party employees, food service employees, maintenance staff, etc., from third parties. So that was modified somewhat, and I thought it was actually a good meeting. Ernestine Weaver made the objections, which the legal question, which is, there are 2 questions. One is, these vaccines have emergency use authorization, but they don't yet have the biological license authorization, the BLA. But both Moderna and Pfizer have now applied for those. And what we said was that it is almost certain, I would say it's certain, that they will have the BLA by the time that fall classes commence or during the fall term. And we need to be prepared in advance. Secondly, there was a question, well, private universities can mandate that, but what about public universities? Don't we have the obligation to serve all the students? And we agreed, we have the obligation to serve all the students, but there are conditions, right? If you wish to be in residence, if you want to be on a contact sport team, if you want to be regularly in class, we can impose certain conditions. And so we had that discussion, and that lasted for about 15 minutes, and that was fine. I mean, I expected that discussion. And we put the emphasis on the moral obligation to protect other people. And it's not just to protect the student, him or herself, who might otherwise not wish to be vaccinated, but also that we have a responsibility to make sure that students who cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons, and that there could be faculty and staff in that situation, or the development of variants of the virus, which may make for some vaccinated people being susceptible. We didn't want to have a pool of unvaccinated people on campus who could spread that. We made it clear that the main question was not a legal one, but the moral obligation of the system to protect all of its members. And so I sent around this morning the modified version, which is basically what we had approved at the previous meeting, modified with the discussions with Jane Gates and with Alice Pritchard. I thought that Interim President Gates was helpful. She was supportive of the resolution, and we divided up the task of informing the various stakeholders that this kind of a resolution would be forthcoming. So I've contacted directly or through third parties all of the unions. So it's AUP at the universities, SWOF for administrative faculty, and ASME for secretarial staff and some of the support staff, and of course the 4Cs and the AFT that Colina has been contacting at the community colleges. And one of the provisions in the resolution is that the application to faculty and staff requires the consent of the administration and the unions. And the details of that would normally be worked out, once in principle this kind of a proposal was agreed upon. So I'm awaiting the results. I know that the AUP was enthusiastic, and they said they'd already voted to have a universal mandate, and that it would be brought up at their council meeting yesterday. I haven't gotten the response from that, but I expected it would be positive.
It was positive.
Okay, thank you, David. And Alice Pritchard and Jane Gates will contact the university presidents and the CEOs at the community colleges. So the next steps for this would be, first of all, I'm asking for this group, the Faculty Advisory Committee, to approve it. That would be important as indicating a positive support. It would then go to a joint meeting of the Academic and Student Affairs and Human Resources Committee, and it would then go to the Executive Committee. They have a meeting scheduled for the 16th, but that is on collective bargaining, so there would probably be a special meeting of the Executive Committee, assuming that the ASA and HR committees approve this, and that the FAC and the Student Advisory Committee as well approved it, and that the unions were in consent, at least in principle. It would then go to the board meeting. The objective is for it to go to the board meeting on the 24th. If there were some snafu or delays in between then and now, there could be the possibility of calling a special meeting of the board. But I stated that my objective was to have it through the board at the June 24th meeting, because that gives everybody sufficient notice. What will happen is the press will announce that there is a mandated vaccination at the CSU systems. Many of the recalcitrant people are going to fall in line. There's going to be some negotiations with the unions as to faculty and staff, but people need time to get the vaccinations, especially for Pfizer and Moderna, whereas we know there's a 3 to 4 week waiting period between shots and then 2 weeks subsequent to that. So I'd like to move the motion. Could I share it? Just to make sure we're all on the same page. Screen 2. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of whereases. As we know, there is one complication which we may have to include as a whereas. There have been some complications. In a small number of cases, there have been adverse reactions. We know that there was some blood clotting associated with the J&J vaccine for women in the 20 to 40 or so age group. And there's been just some reports, and I believe the FDA is meeting today on the myocarditis, some swelling of the heart muscle in a number of younger males that has been reported. I think there are 7 cases reported in the United States, but there are much more reported in Israel, which has a very high vaccination rate. I think it was something like 175. None of which have been fatal, all of which have been dealt with medically within a number of days. But there will probably be a caution communicated to physicians with respect to that. That may be something we're going to have to add in the whereases. But as you can see here, the basic resolution says the following resolution was developed based on a discussion and unanimous vote by the working group, including faculty, etc. And it then goes on to say, be it resolved that the Board of Regents adopt the following principles as the basis for a mandated vaccination policy, with specific implementation measures, including verification and enforcement, to be developed by each sector of the CSU community, community colleges, state colleges, and state universities, as the circumstances of the epidemic, its spread and mutations, and vaccine efficacy and approval evolve. And then we have requirement for all students, requirement for faculty and staff, with the exception, obviously, of those who have medical exemptions. Request an executive order, legislative action, or board decision for third-party contractors who have employees regularly or occasionally on the campus. Require all students, faculty, and staff to report their status. Require that all visitors to CSU campuses wear face masks, with the allowance for institutions to limit them to certain buildings. Ensure that each college and university has available and qualified support staff who can assist medically exempt students and provide advice to those who have concerns about vaccination. Hold clinics on the campuses for the universities and colleges for students, faculty, staff, and employees. Launch an educational campaign for each college and university to make all members of the community aware. And we say here that prioritizing education and persuasion, that is the main means of getting implementation, with enforcement as a last resource. Specific measures to be determined based on the evolution of the pandemic and vaccine approval. And I think it's implicit in this, and I know that there have been some objections, at least on my campus, from one person. Does that mean we're going to fire employees or expel students? And the answer is no, but there are other measures that can be taken. Monitor for mutations and breakthrough cases that might require additional vaccinations or booster shots, and also provide for review and revision. So we want to include that directly in the resolution for the policy for spring 2022, based on assessment of the success of the mandated universal vaccination policy and change circumstances that may occur from now and then. So that's the resolution that I'm putting before you.
I'll move.
Okay. Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Yeah,
Lois.
I have a real concern because there was an email exchange yesterday within my union where one of the union members is saying that the unions can't endorse mandatory vaccinations of faculty and staff. You need to talk to Danny Livingston of CBAC. I don't understand any of that.
I don't either. I mean, it isn't a CBAC issue because it will only affect the campuses of CSCU.
And I don't know why our union 4Cs could not endorse this.
Well, they should, but at the very least, they have been informed.
I'm gonna have a real problem if they don't.
Well, I think you should insist that they do. Yes, I agree with you. I mean, there are going to be objectors, and there are the legal issues of the status of the vaccines and the public versus private, and we're going to have the same problem, by the way, that you're just having with the 4Cs with ASME, because they don't have a bargaining unit for the 4 universities, so far as I know, and it's a statewide ASME. So I don't know what's going to happen with them as well. But it's important. AUP has definitely approved it, as David Stoloff just indicated. David, were you at the meeting? I'm not sure he heard me. But anyways, thanks for bringing up the problem, Lois, and we'll try and deal with it. We're on a short timetable. This is really quite important.
I know, and this exchange really bothered me.
Okay, well, I'll try and follow up on that, and Kalina as well.
Ron?
Yeah, I'm not sure this needs to be in the resolution, David, but I know that the EOC came out last week in support of employers
Yes.
requiring employees to be vaccinated. So in terms of equal opportunity, we don't have an issue there.
Yeah, that's good. I'll keep that in mind. We can add to the whereases. No, I wouldn't do it at this point, but it may be that as we go further in discussion, I'll have that added. Are we ready for a vote?
All right. Yeah. Seems that we are. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, resolution passes.
Okay. Thank
Thanks
you.
for all your work on that, David. That's really, that's a lot of committee work, but it sounds like it was pretty positive.
Yeah, I think I think we have a good chance of getting this through because I think there's also support from Jane Gates and Alice Pritchard, and that's important that we are on the same page with respect to this issue, and that's one where we have I think a unity of purpose.
Yeah. Pretty impressive work, and it was a good opportunity for a good crew of people to put their mind to something, right? I love the fact that, like, for example, like Audrey was working on this with, folks like Bill Farraklis and stuff. It was just a good opportunity.
It was really, I tried to get, there were 2 people who I requested for the committee, but they weren't able to attend. It should have been a committee of 8, but everybody contributed. And I should add that there is a second part of it, which was a response to questions on mandatory. And you can see I put it up here that Jane Gates had asked us about the current emergency use authorization, timetable to biologic license approval, current Connecticut state law and limitations on vaccinations, best practice in ensuring that all faculty and students are vaccinated, treatment of medical and religious exemptions was, religious exemptions have been dropped by the state legislature and the governor for mandatory school vaccinations, and consequences for failure to vaccinate. And so we had a second document, which I've sent around to everybody. Especially the consequences for failure to vaccinate are important. And so, I draw your attention to those. So I'll let everybody know as this advances further, what is happening with the various unions, with the joint meeting of HR and ASA, with an executive committee of the board, and with the next board meeting.
And the 4Cs will be considering it next Thursday at their executive board meeting. So.
Yeah, that's all we need. I mean, we don't need a vote of all the membership, but it was supposed to mention union leadership because the colleges and universities are not in session now. It can't go to a general assembly.
Right. All right. Thank you, David. Campus reopening. So this is just for open discussion. It's strangely hard to find out what's affecting, all the different constituents in the college. But what have you heard? Are we doing okay? Things have gotten significantly less scary for me anyway in the last month. So we're good, no concerns, nothing to follow up on.
Lena, I just have a comment. This is Mary Beth.
Sure.
So this isn't, I guess it's partially related to reopening, which is why I'm bringing it up here, but I've been doing a lot of reading this summer about kind of like repopulating, just in general businesses workplaces and things like that. And I think one thing that, what I've been reading, and I think would be important for us to sort of stay on top of it, is that we shouldn't really go back to like just the way things were, right? Like a lot of workplaces are trying to take the things that worked during the pandemic and bring those forward, right? So I've been reading a lot of articles about like working parents and how workplaces are now going to be working to sort of cater a little bit more to having a better work-life balance and things like that. And so I think that should be something that we're considering as more and more people are being, called back into work. Can campuses, offer, people to do meetings remotely, right? Can there be some flexibility in some of that, right? Obviously, we want to be on campus and available for our students, but when there are times where that's not necessary, can there be some advantages to the fact that we went through this time period? And can we think about how that might sort of reshape, how we go forward as employees? So I just think that's something that, this group maybe want to sort of stay on top of as we go forward, so that we don't just sort of erase the year and a half and be like, okay, that never happened. We're just back to what we started with. And because there were certain things that weren't working. And so maybe we can use this as an opportunity to, move forward with things that might help, people have a better balance between their work and their life and, things like that. So just sort of something to keep in mind.
I agree. I do hope that we go back to something slightly different. So hope so. I know at Gateway there was one section. I don't think this happened anywhere else in the system. On June 1st, there was just one department at Gateway staff who were required to just immediately show up 5 days a week. It would just boom. And that was sorted out. There was just sort of like a quick spat of emails between union and members and so on, and it was sorted out. And it turned out it really wasn't that big a deal because the area has been so decimated. I think there were like 4 people left. So there was no issue of social distancing or anything like that. And that was part of the reason that they needed this extra effort to keep up with the workload. But so that was one area that went back super quickly. But I think other than that, across the system, there is a sort of at least a gradual phase in and an acknowledgement that we'll probably be sorting things out slowly and figuring out what works. And I hope that's the case. Go ahead, Myrna. Myrna? So I see that you unmuted, Myrna, but I can't hear you. And I know that at the beginning you were having trouble hearing. Yeah, no, we can't hear you. We give it a second and come back to you. Okay, I see you in the chat, Myrna. If you end up being able to connect, just jump back in. For the time being then, anything else on reopening? I guess we'll just continue to sort of track and make sure that there's nothing to worry about. Next item is FAC elections. So as far as I know, I think last we met, Tungus and Capital were going to have elections like within the month. Updates. Paul's not here. And Fran just went off camera for a second. Mike, Emmanuel, we didn't hear from you last time. Are there any updates with your FAC election? Are you with us again next year?
No, I should know that. Yes, I actually am. Actually,
You are.
I was thinking about it. I was thinking about something else. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Great. Yay. And then is Fran back yet? I believe he was reelected.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Oh, I can now. Yes. Oh, I see
I
that
can
you
see
have,
myself on camera, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I won, so I'm back.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can see the little your Wi-Fi is going out. So it killed video for a sec. All right. Okay, that's great. And then I'll have to check in with Paul because they should have had an election by now. We haven't heard from Quinnebog and we have not heard from Western. Those are the two I have to follow up with. Western's not a big deal. It's a university, so they can do it whenever. Quinnebog, we're going to need something from, so just Capital and Quinnebog now. So we should be ready to run something in September. We're good. Okay, number 7, FAC bylaws. I know that you had suggested this, Fran. Do you want to talk about it, or the idea is to put together a small group to talk about whether or not there any further modification of the bylaws is necessary?
Yeah, I don't know who first suggested it, but I think it's a good idea because I don't believe those bylaws have been looked at since, they were created. So this probably is a good time to at least take a look at them.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, there was a lot of revision in 2019
Okay,
to make it possible that we would have a representative from every college.
yes.
So there was a lot of that, but I think since then, a lot of the shifting of like reporting lines and so on, I think has brought up the question again of whether we are in fact having every college represented and if there's a need for further representation. So I think that's the question that keeps kind of coming up. I don't know that there's any sense of how they might need to be modified, but we could sort of look through them and see if there's anything necessary. Is anyone interested in taking a look at these over the summer? That's a no from David.
Although I must say, it's beyond me why only 3 or 4 universities vote and why it rotates. And I don't know, is that in the legislation or is that in the bylaws?
I think it's in the legislation, but Barbara knows better than I do. Barbara, are you there?
Yeah, it's in the legislation.
Yeah, so can't change that. I mean,
Yeah.
the ideal would be 1 vote for every university for
Right.
Charter Oak and 1 vote for every community college.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe
Nope,
that's
can't
something
change
that
it.
we can propose for legislative change, taking into account our experience this year with the legislature. That may be the kind of thing, however, that they'd be willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Give them an easy one to start off with.
Mm-hmm. So I suspect I know a couple of people who would be willing to look at it, but it would be nice to have new folks. This is also something, given that our election is already in process, we are not going to be changing anything significant for this election. I have a feeling that do you want to look at bylaws during the summer is not exactly the best proposal anyone's ever heard. This is something we could maybe talk about looking at in the fall, if that's more tolerable.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Does anyone
this
want
is
to express
Barbara.
any interest
was-
or go ahead?
No, just I was a major part of all that, looking at it last time, which was fairly recent, and it wouldn't take long for anybody to look through them. But I don't think there's anything there that I mean, it's all pretty routine stuff,
Mhm.
except for the things we can't control. It would be great if we could change the number of votes and all that, but that's all legislative. And I think the feeling in the past has been worry, especially when Mark Ojakian was around, that if we tried to change anything, then the system office might just propose eliminating the FAC in there. So we better leave it alone.
Right.
Yeah. The last bylaws were revised March 22nd, 2019. I have that.
Yeah. And that was just a lot of work from Barbara mostly, and right? I think it was mostly you, right, Barbara and Stephen?
Oh, and Stephen Adair, yeah.
And Stephen, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because we
I
wanted to
don't,
be sure both the colleges and universities were happy with what we came up with.
right. And so I don't think that this is going to be heavy duty. I think that what we really need is a conversation of just sort of reflection to make sure that this thing is still doing what it should. And if there's any need for revision, that would require, you know, some actual work, right? But for that initial conversation, I think you are essential, Barbara, because you know them. I think you've been involved with them more than anyone else. Let's make a plan for a conversation about this September-ish. Does that sound fine? All
Well, I
right.
think it's never a bad idea for people to read the bylaws. It's a good idea for more people to be familiar with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not very long or complicated. So we have not been violating them. We've been doing fine. So that's good.
We have, but getting the hang of the voting thing has sort of eluded some folks for sure.
That's a tricky business. Yeah.
It is. Okay, so let's do that. And I think we'll try to, does anybody want to volunteer for that right now? Otherwise I will, yeah.
I will volunteer because
Okay.
I mentioned this and I asked you to put it on the agenda, so
Yeah.
happy to.
Anyone else?
I'll volunteer. I'll do it too. It's Mike.
Mike? Okay, so Mike Shea and Fran. Okay, anyone else? All right, we'll try to keep the group balanced. And I don't know if we should definitely, I think it's just you here today, Linda, but I'll definitely get in touch with you and Patrice and see, just to make sure that you're part of that conversation also.
Thanks, because I was thinking it might be nice to have somebody from Charter Oak on it, but
Yeah.
when our elections happen, we may have some new alternates and they may be interested. It might be good for them to get to know the bylaws that way. I'm not sure, but
That sounds good.
okay, thanks.
Okay, sounds great. All right.
Well, this is Barbara. I'll kind of be available if anybody has any questions of how this came about or why or things like that.
Okay. Good crew.
Okay.
We're good. Thank you. Moving on, 8 documents received. You've got a long list of resolutions, all linked in the agenda. Gateway resolution on TAP substitutions, if I remember correctly, this is about a little bit of overreach from the system office direction. Gateway also has a resolution on the New Deal for Higher Ed and College for All. That's kind of cool. All right, thanks, Sean and Jen. Got your notes. Thanks. Norwalk, it has endorsed Southern's commentary on Acme. Has a resolution on the shared governance work group that amounts to rejecting it. That's right, Lois?
Yes.
Yes. And the resolution on APRC. Naugatuck Valley, shared governance, again, rejecting it. And a resolution on the 14 aligned degrees and certificates, commenting on the governance process. Middlesex has a resolution on the shared governance proposal that amounts to a rejection also, and has included some commentary, and there's the original Southern commentary on Acme to CCIC. Is there anything missing from the last month that should be added, resolutions that are of interest or potential interest to the rest of the system? I didn't mention, I know David Central also endorsed Southern's commentary, but I didn't know if you had a sort of, if it was an informal vote or if you have a document.
There was definitely a resolution. I'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll add that to the list then.
And Colleen and Naugatuck Valley passed 2 more resolutions on the line program. So
Okay.
there's a total of 3 of them, because there were 3 batches at which they were sent to us. They all essentially say the same thing, though. They're pretty much all the same thing. So,
All right.
you know, I think one is representative of them all.
Okay. Thanks. I'll try to get them from you after the fact. Go ahead, Fran.
Yeah, and Tungus did actually undertake a vote on the proposed shared governance organization.
That's right.
So I'll get that to you.
Thanks. And again, was it a rejection, an abstention?
It was a rejection.
Okay. All right, thanks. So that list of documents is good enough for this month? Cool. At some point, I will find the time to actually post them on the site, I promise. It'll get there. Old business, new business. Myrna, your hand's not up again, is it? It's just still? Oh. Still can't hear you, sorry. Sorry, Myrna, still can't hear you, so chat if you can, okay? All right, so we are good. Super efficient today. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconds?
Second.
I'll second it.
All right.
Second,
Bye, all. I'm stopping the
have a
recording.
nice weekend.
You too.
Bye.